You find yourself sitting cross-legged upon a thin mat woven from dried leaves in the depths of an ancient Indian forest. The air is thick and humid, heavy enough that each breath seems to weigh against your chest, as though nature itself wishes to suppress your will to remain conscious. The incessant drone of insects forms a monotonous orchestra of minor irritations, persistent enough to test even the greatest patience. Mosquitoes relentlessly pierce your exposed skin, each bite a tiny reminder of the harshness of physical reality. In front of you sit three venerable sages, their beards long and white, eyes narrowed with centuries of accumulated disdain for youthful misunderstanding. Their frail forms, barely clothed in faded saffron robes, belie the strength of their convictions, hardened through decades spent in deep meditation and endless debate. You came here seeking wisdom, perhaps even profound enlightenment. But now you suspect that you might have wandered mistakenly into a grim test of endurance instead. The eldest among the sages, whose voice emerges like a slow drip of honey, overly sweet, yet annoyingly viscous and frustratingly slow, opens the discussion with a statement that appears rehearsed through countless repetitions. Reality, he intones, pausing with a practiced solemnity, is nothing more than the dream of Brahman. Your futile attempts to grasp its true essence merely prolong your inevitable awakening to disappointment. His words, intended to strike awe, instead prompt a weary sigh. You've heard variations of this before, and you hoped for something fresher, more inspiring. Yet here you are again, entangled in a philosophical debate whose tempo is deliberately tuned to drain enthusiasm from even the most fervent seeker. The sage continues to elaborate upon this tired metaphor, drawing increasingly tedious parallels. Brahman dreams, he claims, worlds into existence and out of existence, an infinite cycle of creation and destruction from which there is no escape. He speaks of universes born within seconds and extinguished in minutes, of lifetimes lived in the blink of an eye, none carrying more significance than dust swept away by a careless wind. Each new example becomes more abstract, and yet somehow more dull than the last. His voice reducing profound cosmological revelations to a sleep inducing monotony. You glance around, observing the surroundings, hoping for distraction. A few wilted flowers droop sadly from low hanging branches, offering no relief from the drab atmosphere. The forest, so rich and vibrant when you first arrived, now seems oppressively uniform, as though the sage's words had sucked the very color and vitality from it. You wonder briefly if reality itself, affronted by the old man's tedious discourse, decided to withdraw its beauty as an act of quiet rebellion. The second sage, younger only by a fraction, eventually interrupts his companion, though not swiftly enough to save you from the depths of boredom into which you've already fallen. You mislead the listener, he argues, voice thick with pedantic certainty. Reality is not a dream, but illusion. Brahman itself does not dream, it merely manifests illusionary worlds. Maya veils our eyes, and we mistake transient shadows for lasting truths. The debate has shifted subtly from dreams to illusions, yet somehow manages to become even more unendurable, he launches into a detailed account of Maya, enumerating how all sensory experiences deceive. Sight is an illusion, sound an echo of illusion, and even the itchy bites of mosquitoes, your one remaining anchor to tangible reality, are mere deceptive sensations. Each repetition seems to erode your remaining hope for an interesting philosophical exchange. You feel your consciousness drifting, inexorably drawn into the sleepy labyrinth his words weave. Briefly, you imagine yourself arising, turning away, and leaving these sages to their endless droning. Yet something compels you to remain seated, perhaps the lingering possibility that wisdom still waits patiently behind this wall of tedium. Perhaps the true lesson here lies not in what they say, but in your ability to withstand it. You straighten your back slightly, making a valiant effort to appear attentive, even though your mind is beginning to fog, much like the mist curling lazily around the forest floor. The third sage, who until now has merely nodded silently, chooses this moment to interject with a gesture of mild impatience. You both obscure simplicity with needless complexity, he says. Reality is neither dream nor illusion. Reality is emptiness, devoid of inherent meaning. The emptiness he describes is unfortunately well reflected in his personality. His voice is utterly devoid of enthusiasm or inflection, and his manner of speaking is as empty and meaningless as the concept he attempts to describe. He pauses between words, as though deliberately trying to fill the space around him with silence, as if each sentence were a precious drop of water, carefully rationed to ensure maximum thirst remains. You briefly consider whether his approach is meant to illustrate his point by example. Perhaps, you muse cynically, emptiness is most profoundly demonstrated by the hollow void of his personality. You inwardly congratulate yourself on this insight, though the accomplishment is fleeting. No sooner does it form than you realize it provides no meaningful relief from the continued drudgery of their debate. A cold wind rustles through the forest canopy, shaking loose droplets of condensation that drip unceremoniously onto your head and shoulders. The sages, of course, remain entirely unaffected, insulated from even minor annoyances by their overpowering absorption in philosophical minutiae. You shiver slightly, partially from discomfort, but mostly from a growing dread that this discussion will never end. Already, hours seem to have passed, though you suspect the truth to be far worse, perhaps mere minutes, elongated cruelly by boredom's peculiar manipulation of time. The eldest sage leans forward slightly, gaze fixing upon your weary expression with thinly disguised amusement. For an instant, you suspect he is fully aware of your growing misery and finds quiet satisfaction in it. And thus, he concludes deliberately, clearly savoring the discomfort of his audience, the truth of reality remains forever beyond our grasp, just as your patience grows thin but never quite breaks. Perhaps enlightenment, after all, lies merely in tolerating one's endless confusion. You ponder this depressing notion briefly, suspecting it might indeed contain more truth than you'd like. Reality, perhaps, truly does consist of little more than patiently enduring boredom and confusion until death mercifully ends the cycle. The three sages lapse into a momentary silence, gazing impassively into the gloom of the forest as though waiting for reality itself to respond. Yet reality remains disappointingly silent, as indifferent to your predicament as it has always been. You sigh deeply, understanding, with growing resignation, that this is merely the beginning of a long and tedious journey through philosophical torment. As you close your eyes briefly, hoping to escape into momentary darkness, you realize with painful clarity that this misty contemplation is not only tiresome, but likely endless. Reality, indeed, is beginning to look suspiciously like an eternity spent in the dull company of these wise, yet astonishingly dreary, old men. And so, the first agonizing segment of your unfortunate philosophical sojourn concludes, not with enlightenment, nor clarity, nor even interest, but with the slow, inevitable drift into a bored and uncomfortable sleep. When you open your eyes again, you're startled to find that almost nothing has changed. The dense Indian forest remains oppressively still, barely allowing a breeze to break through the endless layers of foliage. Humidity still clings stubbornly to your skin, as if the air itself seeks to hold you prisoner. You blink slowly, painfully aware that your short rest has brought no relief. Instead, it has merely reset the tedious reality you're condemned to endure. The three sages, having remained motionless during your brief slumber, resume their monotonous discourse without a single glance toward you. It's as if they consider your consciousness irrelevant, merely another inconsequential illusion. The second sage, who earlier introduced himself as the foremost authority on the concept of Maya, the veil of illusion, now dominates the discussion. His manner of speaking is uncomfortably persistent, as though he intends to exhaust all possible counterarguments by sheer repetition alone. His voice resonates monotonously, resembling the tiresome drone of cicadas in the midday heat. Reality, he proclaims, raising a bony finger as if issuing a solemn warning, is nothing more than an endless procession of illusory forms. Each manifestation is ephemeral, fleeting, arising merely to distract us from recognizing our own boundless ignorance. You sigh inwardly. The statement itself might have been insightful once, but after what seems an eternity, its novelty is thoroughly exhausted. Yet the sage presses forward relentlessly, determined to describe every conceivable instance of illusion, evidently intent on convincing you of something you've long since ceased to care about. With weary persistence, he lists countless examples from mythology, history, and everyday life. There are illusions of power, of wealth, and of fame, each meticulously illustrated with painfully dull anecdotes that seem specifically selected for their lack of intrigue. He recalls kings who believed themselves immortal, empires that claimed eternal dominance, and ambitious souls who chased dreams only to realize, too late, that their aspirations were little more than empty phantoms. He speaks at length about Indra, king of the gods, who constructed a palace of illusions, each room containing another deceptive reality. Every room promised something different: riches, wisdom, pleasure, but each was ultimately empty, exposing Indra's pursuit as fruitless. As the sage recounts this story, you empathize deeply with Indra's weariness, feeling yourself similarly trapped in a labyrinthine maze constructed solely from boredom and empty words. You glance around the clearing, hoping for some distraction, however minor, from the sage's relentless oratory. But the forest itself appears complicit in this torment. Leaves sway gently in hypnotic synchronization, insects drone on without reprieve, and the sun remains obscured behind a stubborn veil of gray clouds. You suspect, for a fleeting moment, that even nature conspires to uphold the notion of infinite illusions, ensuring you remain firmly trapped within this tedious philosophical loop. The first sage, who had earlier spoken of reality as Brahman's dream, suddenly interjects in his ponderous manner, challenging his companion's interpretation of Maya with lethargic disdain. You oversimplify the subtlety of illusion, he says slowly, emphasizing each syllable as if to punish you further. Reality's true illusion is that it permits us to believe our existence has meaning. That belief, friend, is the cruelest deception. You groan inwardly, realizing this is not a rebuttal, merely a variation on the same relentlessly tiresome theme. Both sages nod gravely, evidently pleased by the depth, or rather, the repetitive superficiality of their insights. The endless echoes of their words become maddening, a slow drip that gradually erodes your sanity. The third sage, still seemingly intent on embodying the emptiness he proclaims, maintains silence, offering neither rebuttal nor encouragement. His quiet presence only amplifies the boredom, his very emptiness becoming yet another monotonous, soundless note in the endless symphony of tedium. The second sage continues without interruption, cataloging increasingly obscure illusions. He recounts the tale of a sage who spent 87 years meditating beneath a tree, believing himself close to enlightenment, only to awaken one day and realize he had never begun meditating at all. He then moves on to a tale of a kingdom which appeared prosperous and peaceful, but was revealed as nothing more than a collective hallucination brought about by mass delusion. He delivers each anecdote in an identical, monotonous tone, carefully removing any trace of drama or excitement, ensuring your continued torment. At some point, the stories lose all distinction, merging into an indistinguishable stream of dull narratives. Kings become beggars, cities vanish into dust, heroes turn out to be cowards. Each tale merely reinforces the underlying theme that reality deceives, disappoints, and ultimately fails to deliver even modest satisfaction. You find yourself wishing desperately that some sudden event, a storm, a stampede of elephants, even a rampaging tiger, would interrupt this endless philosophical droning. Yet nothing occurs. The forest remains stubbornly passive, as though resolved to mirror your own resignation. Eventually, the sage exhausts his supply of historical and mythical examples and descends into more trivial illusions, optical tricks, mirages in the desert, and reflections in still water. You realize with deep dread that he is determined to leave no stone unturned in his examination of illusory phenomena. The deeper he delves into the commonplace, the more unbearably tiresome his discourse becomes. He recounts with tedious precision how objects beneath water appear displaced, how heat waves rise from roads, creating imaginary pools that vanish as soon as one approaches, and, most tortuously of all, how even time itself can be distorted by perception. On this point, at least, you silently agree. Every second spent listening to him does indeed feel like an eternity. As your mind struggles to endure, your eyes drift lazily toward the sky, searching futilely for something, anything, that might offer relief. But the clouds remain unmoving, the forest retains its stubborn sameness, and your tormentors show no sign of stopping their wearying discourse. Just as your will begins to erode into hopelessness, the second sage finally pauses, perhaps only to breathe. The brief silence is blissful yet fleeting, offering barely enough time for your ears to recover from the incessant verbal onslaught. But before relief fully settles, he resumes, this time with an ominous declaration. Thus he intones, clearly savoring the opportunity to deliver his final, mind numbing conclusion. The greatest illusion of all is your belief that this discourse will lead anywhere meaningful, for meaning itself is an illusion. You close your eyes briefly, surrendering to despair. Perhaps, you think wearily, the sage is right. Perhaps your quest for wisdom, clarity, or even simple entertainment has always been an illusory pursuit. Perhaps the truth of reality lies precisely in its relentless refusal to offer anything more than endless disappointment. And as the second sage finally concludes his agonizing monologue, you become painfully aware that the debate, just like reality itself, will indeed prove infinite. Infinite in its dullness, infinite in its disappointment, and infinite in the tedious repetition of ideas that were barely interesting when first uttered. You shift your position on the rough mat of dried leaves, hoping to alleviate the growing numbness in your legs. It is a futile effort. Nothing, it seems, can distract from the ceaseless monotony of the sage's interminable dialogue. You begin to suspect your limbs are simply choosing unconsciousness to spare you further psychological torment. As the second sage's voice finally fades into silence, a blessed relief that lasts all of a mere 10 seconds, the third sage gently stirs from his profound stillness. Until now, he has remained oddly passive, offering no insight nor interruption, content merely to exist as an empty vessel within the endless cycle of philosophical ennui. But now, in a moment you immediately dread, he begins to speak. His voice is even more featureless than you feared, flat, hollow, utterly devoid of passion or conviction. Listening to him feels like staring into an abyss where nothing interesting could ever arise. His very presence radiates emptiness, and you realize with miserable certainty that this must be his deliberate method of illustrating his philosophical stance. Reality, he murmurs softly, with a tone resembling the rustling of dry leaves stirred by a weak and uninspired breeze, is neither dream nor illusion. It is emptiness. All things arise from emptiness and return inexorably to emptiness. You had hoped, foolishly perhaps, for something different, something to alleviate your growing torment. Yet his words plunge you further into a dreary and meaningless void. It occurs to you grimly that emptiness might indeed be the most accurate description of this miserable moment. His slow speech continues inexorably, each syllable weighted with ponderous deliberation that seems calculated specifically to drain any lingering spark of enthusiasm you might have retained. Consider this forest, he drones, gesturing vaguely to the dense surroundings with an utterly dispassionate hand. It seems filled with life, trees, insects, animals, even ourselves. Yet beneath all this apparent activity lies only emptiness. Each being is merely a temporary gathering of conditions, arising briefly from nothing and inevitably dissolving back into nothing. You follow his gaze wearily around the forest, observing the familiar scenes you once found captivating, now rendered painfully meaningless. The trees that once appeared vibrant are now hollow sentinels, standing as lifeless symbols of futility. Even the insects, buzzing incessantly around you, seem to embody emptiness, tirelessly repeating their insignificant routines until their eventual meaningless deaths. He continues with a lethargy that seems intentionally cultivated to torture his listeners. Our thoughts and emotions, too, are empty. Joy, sorrow, excitement, all mere fleeting phenomena arising briefly to deceive us into believing they matter. Yet beneath them lies nothing but endless, featureless emptiness. You glance toward the other two sages, silently pleading for them to intervene, but they remain frustratingly passive, apparently content to let this empty drone continue indefinitely. You briefly consider interrupting yourself, yet the effort required seems far beyond your rapidly dwindling capacity for action. Thus, you remain seated, resigned to the slow erosion of your sanity. The third sage, seemingly encouraged by your passive endurance, presses forward relentlessly. He describes emptiness with such exhaustive detail that even emptiness itself seems unbearably overcrowded with boredom. He speaks of ancient temples now abandoned, their once sacred halls empty and silent. He recalls the forgotten cities, their bustling markets and lively streets, now nothing but windswept ruins, inhabited solely by echoes and ghosts of meaningless pasts. Each image serves only to deepen your despair, reinforcing the dreary truth that everything indeed dissolves into insignificance. The sage then methodically outlines the doctrine of sunyata, the profound Buddhist concept of emptiness, meticulously dissecting its nuances and complexities. His explanations are precise and thorough, yet so utterly devoid of passion or enthusiasm that even profound truths become unbearable burdens. He illustrates his points with laborious examples. A cup's usefulness derives from its emptiness. A wheel's function arises from the empty space at its center. A room only exists because of its vacant interior. With each example, emptiness becomes less a profound philosophical idea and more an unbearable repetition of obvious and dull statements. You begin to suspect that he delights, secretly perhaps, in reducing profound truths to banality, systematically destroying any allure they might once have held. He continues to dissect reality until you feel that even your own self is little more than an empty shell, sustained merely by inertia rather than any meaningful existence. The sage then elaborates with torturous precision upon the emptiness of human ambition. We build empires, he says dryly, seeking lasting recognition. Yet all empires collapse, leaving only empty monuments and forgotten stories. Wealth, status, power, all equally hollow, fragile illusions that crumble into dust. He enumerates rulers whose ambitions led them to ruin, emperors who built magnificent palaces only to witness their empty chambers haunted by echoes of lost greatness, warriors who conquered vast territories only to find themselves alone atop mountains of meaningless triumph. Each example is recounted with tedious clarity, deliberately drained of any drama or excitement, as if he is personally committed to extinguishing every flicker of interest you might still retain. Your thoughts begin to drift dangerously toward surrender, your mind inching toward the very emptiness he describes. The world around you blurs slightly, colors fading, sounds becoming indistinct. His relentless droning threatens to pull you inexorably toward a void of endless indifference, a black hole from which no spark of enthusiasm or curiosity could ever escape. Just as you teeter dangerously on the brink of existential despair, the sage pauses briefly, offering a momentary glimpse of mercy. Yet before relief can truly settle, he resumes his relentless discourse, now shifting to the emptiness of love and relationships. Even bonds between beings, he explains with bleak satisfaction, are transient and ultimately meaningless. Affection fades, friendships dissolve, lovers separate. In the end, each individual returns inevitably to solitude, embraced only by emptiness. You contemplate this depressing assertion, unable to deny its harsh truth, yet desperately wishing it were otherwise. The sage's dull monotone renders even the idea of companionship hopelessly unappealing. You wonder grimly whether he has ever experienced genuine affection or if, perhaps, his philosophy of emptiness has simply rendered him incapable of enjoying human connection altogether. The afternoon slowly fades into evening, casting the forest into deeper shadows, reflecting your sinking spirits. The sage's endless recitation continues, now extending into the emptiness of human striving, goals, achievements, even the pursuit of enlightenment itself. Enlightenment, he finally declares in his most discouraging tone yet, is merely recognition of emptiness. Even wisdom offers no escape, only a clearer view of the endless void. You close your eyes, overwhelmed by the oppressive weight of his words, feeling yourself dissolve into the very emptiness he has so painstakingly described. For a brief, terrible moment, you wonder whether this was the sage's intention all along. His meticulous, unbearable monotony, a deliberate effort to obliterate any lingering illusions you might have held about reality. When at last his voice falls silent, you sit quietly, utterly drained and devoid of hope. The forest feels darker, emptier, even the faint whispers of insects seem distant, hollow. Reality, it seems, has finally revealed itself in all its bleakness, an endless, tedious, exhausting emptiness. You slowly realize, with crushing resignation, that the sage was correct. Reality is indeed empty, and worse, it is empty precisely in the way he described, utterly dull, excruciatingly monotonous, and devastatingly, relentlessly meaningless. The darkness settles more heavily upon the forest now, deepening the oppressive gloom that surrounds you. The trees have faded into silhouettes, devoid of life or individuality, each indistinguishable from the next. You shift again on your uncomfortable mat of dry leaves, aware that your physical discomfort is trivial compared to the mental anguish inflicted by the sage's relentless, tedious debate. Each minute that passes feels like a small eternity, a deliberate punishment crafted to slowly erode your spirit. Having exhausted discussions of emptiness, illusion, and dreams, the three venerable sages now enter a new, more excruciating phase of their philosophical ordeal, practical demonstrations. Each sage, determined to prove the veracity of his viewpoint, begins reciting exhaustive, repetitive examples from their vast and dreary repertoire. You realize with profound dread that this latest phase of the debate promises to surpass all prior torment in its sheer, soul draining monotony. The eldest sage, once again assuming authority with his ponderous voice, begins with a detailed recital of forgotten kingdoms. He speaks of empires whose histories stretch back thousands of years, describing their meaningless rise and equally meaningless fall in excruciatingly dull detail. He meticulously chronicles wars over territories that no longer exist, victories celebrated by heroes whose names have vanished into oblivion, and dynasties whose proudest achievements were little more than ephemeral ripples on history's surface. He drones endlessly about obscure kings who proclaimed their reigns eternal, erecting monuments to immortalize their grandeur. Yet those very monuments now lie buried beneath centuries of dust, their inscriptions faded into illegibility. Each historical anecdote blurs into the next, a continuous stream of indistinguishable events designed specifically, it seems, to annihilate any lingering interest you might have had in history itself. The second sage, irritated by his companion's monopolization of boredom, quickly interjects with his own examples of illusory existence. He recounts lengthy tales of legendary heroes whose noble quests ended in pointless tragedy. He describes, with painstakingly tedious precision, warriors who dedicated their lives to retrieving mystical objects, only to discover those objects non existent, mere projections of their own desires and delusions. He speaks of mystics who retreated into mountain caves, seeking truths that never materialized. Each sage, he emphasizes repeatedly, deceived himself into believing that enlightenment or fulfillment awaited at journey's end. But every quest ultimately concluded with bitter realization. There was nothing waiting at the end but disappointment and further illusion. The tales become indistinguishable, blending into a dull tapestry of despair, each story more tedious than the last, stripped intentionally of any excitement or drama. The third sage, seemingly determined to ensure you experience the full measure of philosophical despair, now enters the conversation once more, his voice low, flat, and relentlessly empty. These examples merely illustrate reality's fundamental emptiness, he states, as though repeating himself somehow makes the idea fresher. Consider, for instance, the cities that thrived along vanished rivers, their populations once vibrant and purposeful. When rivers dried and trade ceased, those cities quickly became abandoned husks, empty shells testifying to the futility of human endeavor. He continues, describing at length civilizations built around temporary conditions, trade routes that shifted, resources exhausted, climates changed. Each example he offers is more wearisome and depressing than the last. You feel your consciousness slipping, worn thin by the endless repetition of pointless tragedies and empty achievements. As the night deepens, stars emerge overhead, their distant glow providing no comfort. You stare upward, vaguely aware that those stars have witnessed countless similar philosophical debates over countless lifetimes, each debate inevitably resolving nothing, leaving participants precisely where they began, trapped in confusion, exhaustion, and boredom. You wonder bitterly if these sages have spent centuries rehearsing these examples, perfecting their monotonous delivery, striving towards some perverse goal of utterly extinguishing the listener's spirit. They recite tales of meaningless battles, empty victories, forgotten sages, abandoned cities, and endless wanderings, leaving no facet of human experience untouched by their meticulous dismantling of purpose. Eventually, you realize with deep dread that this endless litany of examples is precisely their goal. They seek to wear you down through sheer repetition, demonstrating practically that reality itself is a never ending cycle of meaningless effort. As their repetitive recital drones on, your mental defenses weaken. You briefly consider standing up, declaring surrender, and fleeing into the darkness. Yet even this feels futile. Where would you run, after all, when reality itself seems committed to tormenting you endlessly? As the sages continue their relentless onslaught of anecdotes, their voices blend into a single, monotonous drone, indistinct yet inescapably oppressive. You begin to lose track of time, unsure whether hours, days, or even years have passed since this ordeal began. Your sense of self feels increasingly fragile, weakened by boredom, confusion, and a deep existential fatigue. At last, the eldest sage pauses, perhaps only to take a breath, yet the brief silence feels almost miraculous. You savor it desperately, hoping that perhaps this interminable debate might finally be nearing its end. Yet before you can gather strength or hope, he resumes, his voice heavier, slower, and even more dreary than before. You, the observer, he intones heavily, his gaze falling upon you like a crushing weight, must understand your role clearly. You are here merely to bear witness. Your attempt to find meaning in this dialogue is itself meaningless. There is no reward for patience, no enlightenment awaiting your endurance. You are simply condemned to observe. The others nod solemnly in agreement, their collective gaze now fixed on you with an intensity you find deeply unsettling. It seems, finally, they have revealed their true purpose, not to educate or enlighten, but to demonstrate practically the hopeless, burdensome emptiness of existence itself. You shudder slightly, unable to deny the grim accuracy of their words. Indeed, your only true purpose here appears to be enduring their monotonous wisdom, a passive victim to their philosophical torture. Your role is neither hero nor scholar, merely an unwilling observer sentenced to eternal boredom. As this bleak realization sinks in, the sages resume their relentless recitation, determined to prove once and for all that no achievement, no victory, no wisdom can ever deliver meaningful satisfaction. Their voices become indistinct murmurs, merging into the soft whisper of leaves stirred by night breezes. The world around you fades slightly, reality itself weakening beneath the sheer weight of your exhaustion. And so you remain, seated helplessly amid ancient trees and relentless sages, condemned to endless observation, forced to confront reality's true nature, repetitive, pointless, eternally unfulfilling. The burden of the observer, you realize grimly, is not merely to watch, but to suffer endlessly the boredom of wisdom that offers no escape, no relief, and absolutely no hope. As this dreary night wears on, you sink deeper into resignation, fully understanding the harsh truth revealed by your tormentors. Reality itself, it seems, is nothing more than an infinite series of tedious events, witnessed endlessly by observers whose only true freedom lies in accepting their inevitable surrender to boredom. In the end, you conclude bitterly, reality offers nothing, not excitement, not wisdom, not hope, only the crushing burden of endless, meaningless observation. At long last, the oppressive night gives way to a pale dawn. Yet even daylight offers no relief, merely illuminating the depressing monotony you've endured through endless hours. The forest awakens sluggishly, birds offering weak, uninspired songs, almost apologetic for disturbing the dreary solemnity of the sage's eternal discussion. You sit quietly, hollowed out by exhaustion and philosophical despair. The sages remain unmoved, still poised to continue their relentless exchange of tedious insights. Realizing that no natural conclusion will ever arise from their infinite debate, you finally recognize that escape is solely your own responsibility. A grim resolve forms within your weary heart, driving you toward action, if not from hope, then from desperation. Gathering your remaining strength, you rise slowly, drawing the startled gazes of all three sages. Until this moment, they've scarcely acknowledged your presence beyond mere passive contempt. Now their expressions shift subtly, revealing mild surprise that you've managed to remain conscious through their deliberate torment. Honorable sages, you begin slowly, your voice hoarse from disuse and despair. Allow me, the humble observer, to share my insights, gleaned entirely from your generous and endlessly detailed discourses. The eldest sage nods slightly, raising a bushy eyebrow in skeptical curiosity. Encouraged by this minimal acknowledgement, you continue deliberately adopting the slow, painfully monotonous tone they've perfected. It seems only fitting, after all, to employ their own methods against them. Reality, as you have painstakingly revealed, is indeed the dream of Brahman. Yet Brahman dreams only of emptiness, filling infinite worlds with illusory, meaningless events. And we, trapped within this endless cycle, foolishly debate the subtle distinctions between illusion, emptiness, and dreams. Thus, all we accomplish is further extending our torment, creating an eternal loop of philosophical misery. The second sage frowns slightly, clearly sensing the deliberate irony underlying your words. Nevertheless, he remains silent, compelled by custom to allow you the courtesy of speech. You seize this moment ruthlessly, fully determined to exact a subtle revenge for the torment you've endured. You speak of illusions, great sages, yet fail to recognize the greatest illusion of all, your own belief that debate will reveal truth. For centuries, you have exchanged the same tiresome arguments, recited the same meaningless anecdotes, each repetition further draining the already empty vessel of existence itself. Each example offered, each kingdom described, each forgotten hero recounted, serves merely to deepen the misery of your listeners, leaving them emptier, more exhausted, and infinitely less enlightened. The third sage shifts uncomfortably, sensing perhaps that he is being specifically mocked. His philosophical commitment to emptiness now appears visibly threatened by your deliberate exaggeration of his own method. Yet he too remains silent, bound by decorum, forced to witness the gradual dismantling of his cherished viewpoint. You continue relentlessly, fully embracing the slow, deliberate, devastatingly boring rhythm they've forced upon you for hours. Each word falls from your lips like a heavy stone, deliberately weighted to inflict maximum boredom and discomfort. Consider also, revered sages, the futility of your own existence. You speak endlessly of emptiness, dreams, illusions, but in doing so, you yourselves have become precisely what you describe. Your lives are empty vessels, your dreams repetitive and hollow, your beliefs nothing more than meaningless illusions. In attempting to demonstrate truth, you have instead demonstrated only despair, boredom, and futility. The eldest sage's expression tightens, the faintest hint of irritation now visible beneath his carefully constructed mask of calm detachment. Yet he still refrains from interrupting, evidently determined to maintain his dignified philosophical facade. At this point, you continue mercilessly. It is clear that wisdom itself is meaningless. Reality stubbornly resists definition, endlessly frustrating all attempts at comprehension. Perhaps the truest form of enlightenment is recognizing precisely this hopeless, meaningless cycle, a recognition not of profound truth, but of despair, and in this despair lies our only genuine freedom, the freedom to abandon all hope of meaning, purpose, or truth. You pause deliberately, allowing silence to fill the clearing, a silence that now feels oppressive, uncomfortable, suffocating. For the first time, the sages appeared genuinely unsettled, their composure visibly eroded by your relentless mimicry of their own dreary style. You see, you conclude, smiling faintly with bitter irony, I have listened carefully to every word you've spoken. I have memorized every tedious anecdote, every repetitive illustration, every meaningless historical example, and now, in perfect imitation of your methods, I shall repeat them again, slowly, meticulously, and without mercy. The sages glance anxiously at each other, suddenly alarmed at the prospect of enduring their own dreary philosophies reflected back at them. Yet before they can object, you begin reciting, word for word, every miserable, exhausting detail they've shared. You recount, in painstakingly dull accuracy, the forgotten kingdoms described by the eldest sage, complete with tedious details about their empty victories, pointless wars, and vanished rulers. Each sentence delivered with excruciating slowness, each phrase deliberately structured to drain the last vestige of patience from your tormentors. Next, you repeat every allusion described by the second sage, methodically enumerating meaningless heroes, forgotten quests, and pointless pursuits of wisdom. Your voice drones hypnotically, each repetition plunging the sages deeper into their own carefully constructed torment. Finally, you address the third sage directly, repeating back to him with perfect accuracy his exhaustive descriptions of emptiness. You detail again the empty temples, abandoned cities, vanished rivers, forgotten empires, all precisely as he had presented, but now infinitely more unbearable. The sage's discomfort deepens with each passing moment, their previous calm dissolving into visible distress. Their expressions reveal mounting panic as they finally recognize the horror of enduring their own teachings. At last, unable to bear your relentless assault, the eldest sage rises suddenly to his feet, interrupting you with a gesture of desperate surrender. Enough, he declares sharply, his voice trembling slightly with suppressed agitation. You have proven your point. Indeed, the endless repetition of our wisdom achieves nothing but torment. It offers neither enlightenment nor comfort, only an eternal cycle of meaningless debate. The other two sages nod vigorously, clearly eager to avoid further repetition of their own monotonous arguments. You regard them silently, allowing your bitter triumph to sink fully into their weary consciousness. Then, wise sages, you reply finally, your voice now soft with exhausted sincerity, permit me to depart. Permit me to abandon this meaningless debate and return to the emptiness of ordinary life. Allow me to accept despair not as defeat, but as liberation from illusion, from emptiness, from dreams. The eldest sage, visibly humbled, bows his head slightly in acknowledgement. Go, observer, you have endured enough. Your despair has taught us a harsh lesson. Perhaps wisdom lies not in seeking truth, but in recognizing when to surrender the search entirely. You nod solemnly, offering one final respectful bow before turning to leave the clearing behind. With each step away from the sages, your relief deepens, your heart feeling lighter, free from the oppressive weight of philosophical torture. The forest now seems oddly comforting in its neutrality, no longer conspiring with sages to torment you. Birds sing gently, the air feels fresh, and your exhausted soul finally knows peace, albeit peace born not from enlightenment, but from the relief of abandoning hopeless debate. As you walk slowly away, you realize that reality, indeed, holds no profound secrets, only endless cycles of repetition, boredom, and despair. Yet recognizing this truth offers genuine freedom, permitting you finally to relinquish all pointless striving and simply accept existence as it truly is, a tedious, repetitive, yet strangely comforting emptiness, one from which escape is possible only through surrender to the quiet mercy of despair itself.